Sunday nights always made me sad, even more so with Joe gone. 1 year after his death, and I still haven't recovered. I still miss him. Hell, I needed him. The world wasn't the same without my baby. Gone was the excitement, the thrills, my purpose. We were a team that could have changed the world, and for the last year, I was doing what I could to keep our goals alive, to finish our plan. Tonight, I was alone again in my Atlanta apartment, sitting in my home office. The Beatles posters and my struggling sketches the only company I had. The Velvet Underground's Venus and Fur, the only break from the solemn silence. This was a song Joe and I bonded to. Our song. October wind burst through the curtains, battering my red pajamas and blue jean jacket, crashing straight into my soul. God, what an awful year it's been. Never have I felt more alone. As I took another sip of crimson wine, I couldn't help but reflect on the isolation, my desolate despair. This anguished anniversary marred my October. To think, this used to be my favorite time of the year, Halloween. Once Joe and I's favorite holiday. Fighting back tears, I looked out the window, out towards the glowing jack-o'-lanterns watching me. Venus and Furs kept sending chills down my spine. To be honest, I had a dark past, a real dark past. Not because I was evil or sick in the head, but because of what I believed in, what we believed in. At one point, I was just your average college girl. Back then, I was ambitious. I just wanted to change the world through my art and graphic novels. Only I was so quiet, insecure. I was one of those geeky black girls most people considered a freak or creepy. I was scrawny, pretty behind the stringy hair and huge glasses, tall without having any poise. My wardrobe nothing more than flannel shirts and jeans. My deep voice a portal to the most dark sarcasm. I suppose my interests in 1960s rock and extreme horror movies were a bit different than most of my classmates. Like a 9-to-5 slave, I led a stagnant existence at Agnes Scott College. Not once did I ever even leave the apartment to explore the Atlanta, Georgia nightlife. Not until I met Joe, that is. Our age difference may have been close to 10 years, but I loved Joe. He got me. He understood me. He was older, but confident, charismatic, and like me, he too appreciated art, which is how I met Joe Glenn in the first place. When I wasn't drawing, horror stories and creepypastas kept me company. They kept me sane, and hunting for new authors led me right into the arms of Joe, right into his fascinating blog on Satanism. In 2017, Joe was finishing up his doctorate at Georgia State. He'd published excerpts from his dissertation online, and his talent shined through every single word. What he wrote wasn't too critical or preachy. It was hypnotic, a thorough examination on Satanists. This was a breakdown without bias, and the more I read, the more I grew intrigued by his updates and new posts, as did so many others. There was no need for romanticism. Satanism had dark aspects for sure, but Joe brought an honest perspective, a rebellious spirit. What he described was a break from the power struggle and hypocrisy the world had been embracing for centuries. Unlike other religions and ideologies, Satanism felt like true freedom. There would be no need for clinging to self-righteous beliefs. or for bow down to gods that may or may not exist. The Church of Satan welcomed everybody. Like a handsome savior, Joe soon arrived in my life. He responded to my emails with the same passion he'd shown in his blog, his charm contagious, and we hit it off, graduating from texting to phone calls, and then onto our first date. My morbid curiosity prevailed. Regardless of my good grades, I wasn't enjoying college. My whole life I'd been alienated, ignored, and bullied. But with Joe, I saw a group willing to accept the weird Z, the real me. And, okay, obviously Joe's attractive looks helped, not to mention the beautiful body and mind. Behind the messy brown hair, Joe's pretty, pale face drew me in, as did his dark eyes and contagious smile. Dressed in a red hoodie and jeans, Joe knew he didn't need to try to impress me on that date. He knew I was already drawn into his fine, weird self. We hit it off immediately. There was no awkwardness. We were just two eccentric souls glad to avoid another lonely night, glad to find each other in the bland sea of the Atlantic college scene. To my relief, Joe liked the same rock and roll I did, liked the same horror movies, the same anime. So naturally, our relationship gravitated towards Joe's field, the occult. My initiation was quick and seamless. Already I was interested, and with Joe, I only got obsessed. There were the books on Satanism, the ceremonies, the rituals. Above all, we both felt free. Joe and I's love soon soared, our pleasure intense. Like rock stars, we ran wild in Atlanta. Our grades started to suffer, but together we got through school. And I finally had friends, finally felt accepted, all because of Joe. Together we'd meet at Joe's apartment at the Beverly Hills. The small building looked like it was constructed with shattered tombstones rather than faded bricks. Both apartment and its tenants well beyond senile. There were only 7 of us in the group. Like me, the others were fans of Joe's ideas, his amazing analysis on Satanism. Instead of selling us, Joe had shown us the dark light. Right there in apartment 16, we'd perform the ceremonies together, the exciting rituals. At first, we dabbled with simple fun. We draw pentagrams, bindus, and other symbols for grotesque graffiti. Fuck with Ouija boards, drink each other's blood, blast Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath till dawn. You know, your complete idiot's guide to Satanism type shit. Only we knew Joe was testing us. He was ingraining us into the culture, slowly but surely, and we loved every minute of it. Soon after, the drugs kicked in. Not grass or meth either, but shrooms and acid, Molly, the liberating shit. Coupling the drugs with wine, and we transcended the boundaries of our world's rigid walls. We had each other, freedom. We were hippies from hell. We still bonded over rock music. Joe and I's first kiss was to Venus and Furs. The song also our first dance. Lou Reed's hypnotic vocals, the perfect soundtrack for our steamy sex. Until I met Joe and got involved in the church, I had no idea how far romance could run, how adventurous I could get. Soon, that song's message even translated into our lives. Joe and I did everything, and sometimes we'd share that joy with others. But as fun as the group sex and free love was, all of us had the stronger thirst for another form of hedonism, bloodlust. At first, it was only small animals, birds, rodents. The critters no one cried too much over. I made damn sure we didn't hurt dogs and cats. But the excitement soon wore off. The ceremonies demanded more. Joe demanded more. Satan demanded more. The first kill was euphoric. We lured Rosemary, one of Joe's elderly neighbors. She had no idea, no clue what we'd brought her into. And Joe's single slice across the throat ran deep, as close to an insta-kill as one cut can get. His antique knife showed no mercy, and neither did the 6 other knives he let us use. We were efficient, but methodical. Rosemary was almost flayed, her skin a tattered canvas of blood, peeled flesh, and outright death. And all the while, Venus and Furs played on, much to my delight. I knew Satan sure approved. Later, we drank Rosemary's blood for fun, then hung her up in a middle school parking lot. I never felt more alive, not just for pleasing Joe and the Dark Lord, but for pleasing myself, and deep down, I knew I needed more. So the seven of us continued. The body count got higher. The sacrifices became crazier, and our joy only increased. There was the homeless man we dissected. Jack, the high schooler we decapitated. Our kills grew more and more elaborate, and the blood became so much tastier. I never experienced more pleasure, experienced more excitement. Venus and Furs joined us for both the sex and killings. The song, Joe and I's Anarchy Anthem. Our body count soon reached the double digits. The corpses, gifts for Satan, the 7 of us kept planning on collecting. Severin, Severin, Lou Reed's drawl called to me. Speak so slightly. The song followed me into the apartment's hallway. Dozens of lit candles illuminated my focused gaze. Moving methodically, I made my way to the living room, all while the plastic jack-o'-lantern smiled at me. Amidst the cool fall air, the flames helped me stay warm, but my soul only grew sadder. The memory is gone from mesmerizing to morose. For once, Venus and Furs wasn't eliciting excitement but anguish, the bad kind of pain. I'm tired, Lou's voice continued. I'm weary. Pulling my jean jacket tighter, I passed the Dracula poster. Not even our glowing skull decorations could amuse me. Nor did its corny cackle when I walked right past it. I could now hear Joe's southern accent, could feel his comfort, but deep down, I knew he wasn't here. Upset, I brushed away my tears, a futile attempt, as the reservoir of teardrops burst. The glass of wine slipped from my grasp. Remnants splashed across the floor like scattered blood. My latest Halloween decoration. Tonight was the 1-year anniversary of Joe's death. October 2017 was when the police started eyeing us, started questioning us. And the news stations got a hold of Joe's dissertation. They stalked his website, stole the books him and I had been working on. That was when our core started crumbling, and when my world started to fall apart. Right after this horror happened, my parents kidnapped me. They took me back to the disgusting world Joe had liberated me from, back to the prison of lies, judgment, and rules, back to the bullshit. Before I could warn Joe or the other hell hippies, I was forced to go to the police. I had no choice. And even then, I knew I should have just shut up and gone to prison. But away from Joe, I was always weak, and this moment was no exception. Weeping, I confessed everything. I turned against the fun, my friends, and against my one true love. The cruel world of conformity was always against us, only now it was damn sure gonna get us. I was stuck back home in Americus, Georgia, when the fateful night finally happened. Hidden away in my suburban prison cell, the midnight newscaster on October 14th struck me like a bullet to the heart. There was a mass suicide in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Beverly Hills, apartment 16. Over 20 candles left in the living room ensnared by flames. The room, a cremation tray containing only charred corpses. Everything else ashes except for a few cult symbols still carved into the white walls. Through the tears, I recognized the names listed. And the last one led to my emotional breakdown. Joe Glenn. Later on, I heard the police found a box by the bodies. Torn clothes and papers were all jammed inside. The box, somehow undamaged by the fire. To everyone, the contents were confusing, about as weird as our beliefs. But I was in on the secret, and I knew one day the whole world would know. Shiny, shiny, Lou Reed's haunting vocal sang to me. Shiny boots of leather. As I got closer to the end of the hallway, my tears vanished. The vague hope set in, a rising excitement. I stopped and reached out. The cold metal handle greeted my fingertips. Like a pitcher gripping a baseball, the occult knife felt comfortable in my grasp. The same dagger Joe had always let me use for our rituals. The same dagger Joe had always let me use for our ceremonies. And one I'd been using for my own ceremonies ever since. A body count no one else knew about. And one inspired both by my art and pain. All around me our song continued. Whiplash, girl child in the dark. Up ahead I saw bright flames. The living room fire and my own inner fire protected me from the October chills. The living room fire and my own inner fire protected me from the October chills. A smile crossed my face. Gripping the knife, I continued on my dark path, right into the warm, welcoming room. Severin, your servant comes and bells. Please don't forsake him. Lou's voice said to set the mood, to set the reunion. I stopped in the living room, still grinning. I didn't focus on the open windows or black October night. Ignored the mini monster figurines lined up on the shelves, the fake black cat. Even from here, I could see rough pentagrams and bindus I'd carved into the walls earlier, not to mention all the papers I'd cut up and thrown into the fireplace. There were newspaper articles about Joe, about the murders, the mass suicide. Then, there was my Agnes Scott degree, all those family pictures of me smiling with the folks. Back when I was the old Z, not the free Z. Halloween had come early for me, and the happiness only made my grin spread wider. My heart kept beating along to the insistent rhythm of Venus and Furs. I knew the destruction ritual had worked, as did all my other rites of Satanism. There stood the hippies from hell. All of them stood by the giant inflatable spider dangling from the ceiling. Everyone held their knives, ready to make more memories. A reunion of the dead. The hippies looked better than ever. Even I felt like I had in 2017. As if we'd all been recreated in the image of our glory days. My friends flashed me their megawatt smiles. Joe emerged from behind them, right from the furnace. His steps so confident, his face still so handsome, his body still so hot. He held out the brutal athame blade. The sight more appealing than a beautiful bouquet, more tantalizing to me at least. Flashbacks to our first date ran through my mind. That amazing excitement returned, our love rekindled. Joe even had on the same red hoodie and jeans. unable to help myself, I walked right up to him, my heart pumping, the beaming smile still stuck on my face. Joe's smooth hands gripped my shoulders. We locked eyes. The fall wind whipped against our hair. The fireplace basked the magic moment in a glorious glow. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "I'm sorry, Joe." "It's okay, babe," Joe said, his grin comforting me, as did the soft touch of his fingers caressing my face. "I understand." Like he was going in for a wedding kiss, Joe leaned in closer. I melted in his arms, ready for the embrace that had been 12 long months in the making. The Velvet Underground continued to serenade us. Lou Reed's hypnotic voice heightened the heat. "Strike, dear mistress, and cure his heart." He sang for a reanimated romance. Venus in Furs was the last step for the ritual. After the candles, the symbols, the destruction of my old life, Lou Reed was the first step to bring us all back together again. At the moment, I was worried I'd gone crazy. Maybe the ritual didn't work. Maybe I was hallucinating or drunk. But once I felt Joe's warm lips collide into mine, all those worries burned away. My boyfriend was back, as was every single one of us. And we'd still make love, still have fun, and still kill again. The townsfolk gathered on the bank of the river Leitha. They've gathered around to see the trial of one Elizabeth Dietrich Ditter. Some of them accused Elizabeth of witchcraft and heresy for failing to attend church regularly. The young woman was just as pious as they come. However, she preferred the company of her lord alone. That did not sit well with some of the townsfolk, nor did it sit well with the local priest who had heard rumors of her involvement in the destruction of her hometown, Guilbefort. Adamant in her innocence, she had protested the accusations by proclaiming she will undertake examinations which would disprove all accusations against her. Hence, she, the local clergy, and townfolk gathered at the bank of the river Leitha. Elizabeth was about to undertake the trial by swimming, wherein if she were a witch, the water would reject her and suspend her body atop its surface. "Remove your undergarments, child, for you might be hiding some hexes in them to help you submerge," ordered Father Herman. Seemingly without a care in the world, Elizabeth locked her eyes with those of the priest and retorted in a dry and aloof tone, "Father, have your men inspect me for any special marks before they throw me into the river." The onlooking crowd roared in excitement at the prospect of the young woman bearing herself before them. Only a woman in league with the devil would announce such an immodest intention to stand naked before her whole town. The priest smirked, assured of his supposed victory. The crowd fell silent. As she began undressing, Elizabeth glanced once more into the eyes of the priest before noting, "We are all but naked before the eyes of our Lord. Garments mean very little when the time of judgment comes. Only people who have fallen to carnal sin would see this as a morally wrong action. I am merely stating my innocence before all those who are present." The crowd began cheering again, almost as if to signify that most of the townfolk believed Elizabeth's innocence. Once she was fully undressed, the cheering had turned into wild shrieks and whistles from men, and embarrassed giggles from the women. Elizabeth, in turn, stood there, filled with pride and conviction. Her face displayed no emotion whatsoever. Her eyes remained half closed in an aloof expression. She seemed almost lost and out of place. "Silence!" the priest ordered before having his men inspect the woman's body. They, in turn, looked and probed at her, while she remained motion and motionless, much to the chagrin of the priest. Father Herman noticed a small mark on Elizabeth's shoulder, almost hidden beneath her long brown hair. He ordered her to remove her hair to the side and expose the backside of her shoulders. She complied silently. "Aha! What is that mark, child?" the priest questioned. Elizabeth turned to face the priest, once more locking eyes with him. The scar of a childhood accident. A faulty shelf collapsed on top of me with its edge cutting deep into my flesh. "Can you present anyone to confirm the story, child?" Father Herman pressed, her gaze fixed and her body language unchanging. Elizabeth responded coldly. "Unfortunately not. All of my relatives are dead, Father." "Well then, perhaps you're a witch after all," the priest declared, to the onlooking crowd who in turn jeered at the prospect. Elizabeth kept on staring at the clergyman, her gaze firmly fixated on him, almost digging into his skull. "No," she retorted calmly. Her response sent shivers down Father Herman's spine. She made him feel uncomfortable, and he couldn't pinpoint why. "Something's wrong with this one," he mumbled softly to himself. Elizabeth smiled at him in an inhumanly wide grin. Just a single moment before reverting to her stone-cold expression. She whispered gently to the priest, "I heard that, Father," her eyes widening with amusement. The priest visibly shuddered at the girl's remark before swiftly ordering his men to tie her to a rope and throw her into the river. Elizabeth didn't protest the procedure. In fact, she seemed happy to take a dip in the cold river below her. The crowd around her fell silent, not knowing what to expect. The majority of her neighbors were sure of her innocence, but some were doubtful. She was, after all, a recluse who didn't attend church and behaved somewhat suspiciously, unsocial at times. A rope was tied around Elizabeth's waist, and one vicar shoved her down into the cold river below her. The whole time, she didn't utter a sound or change her expression, not even when they had thrown her into the cold water. Her gaze remained somewhat aloof, and her facial features remained relaxed, almost inhumanly so. A loud splash followed her body hitting the leitha's water, and then her body sank into the river. There was no gasping or struggling. There was nothing at all, as if no woman was being submerged into the water. The calm became eerily unbearable to the crowd that silently stood awaiting the reemergence of the young woman from within the water as the moments dragged on. The priest stood at the edge of the bank, awaiting Elizabeth's body to float upwards on its own. He became increasingly irritated when her body refused to surface. The crowd, in turn, became bitter, and the procedure seemed to drag on too long. They began screaming and demanding Elizabeth be pulled out of the water. At first, the priest ignored their calls. But once the crowd became riotous enough, Father Herman finally relented and ordered his men to pull the young woman out of the leitha. Once her body emerged from within the water, the people roared in excitement. Their daughter figure had proven her innocence. Elizabeth's expression remained characteristically uninterested. The priest took one look at her dripping face and then forced himself to look away. Her dark eyes felt as if they were piercing his soul. He couldn't handle her cold gaze any longer. Once Elizabeth was untied and allowed to dress, the priest looked at her and proclaimed, "I proclaim thee innocent of all charges of witchcraft and heresy, Elizabeth Dietrich-Ditter." The crowd roared in approval, delighted in the proclamation. Elizabeth approached the priest, once fully dressed, and stared him in the eyes before saying, in a somewhat shaking tone unlike herself, Father, I've had a divine premonition while I was submerged in the waters of the river. The priest felt as if the young girl was about to devour his soul. Her words sounded muffled and slowed to him. Sweat began forming on his forehead. She wouldn't move her gaze away from him. She stood in front of him, staring at him as if he was a statue, unmoving, unchanging, unblinking. What are you saying, child? He questioned nervously. Elizabeth's eyes gleamed as she spoke once more. The voice of an angel, warm and husky, spoke to me. It said one of the people around me was a true devil worshipper. What kind of nonsense do you speak of, child? I swear, Father, I swear in the Lord's name, the angel told me to sprinkle the water in my hairs across the feet of the men around me to find which one is the sorcerer. How dare you speak the Lord's name in vain? I do not, Father. Believe me. During the exchange of the two, the crowd fell silent again, confused by the words of the young woman before them. Some took her words seriously, while others began to think she had finally lost her mind. As the priest began threatening Elizabeth with damnation and condemnation, she walked around the edge of the bank, spraying waters from her hair all over the clergymen around her. Ignoring the priest's warning, she sprinkled water on each and every one of them as they stood, dumbfounded and speechless towards her. As she did, she reassured them that as long as they were on the right path, they shouldn't feel anything. Once she reached the final vicar, she heard a loud thud behind her, followed by the blood-curdling screams of Father Herman. The crowd gasped loudly in unison as Elizabeth turned around to see the priest lying on his back, clutching at his feet. His shoes were slowly melting off. With each passing moment, the screams of pain grew in volume. The young woman ran up to the priest and stood over him. Blood began flowing profusely out of where his shoes used to be. The crowd was panicking, along with the clergymen who had gathered around the agonized priest. Father Herman was screaming ungodly profanities as his body twisted and turned in response to the blazing sensation that came from his lower appendages. As the clergymen were trying to make sense of what was happening, Elizabeth ran towards the priest's carriage and grabbed a cross from within it, running back towards the fallen priest. Some townsfolk ran up to the priest as well. The whole riverbank became chaotic like a scene out of a battle. Elizabeth kneeled over the priest and began praying in Latin. Father Herman noticed her prayers and his eyes widened in fear. She wasn't supposed to know the tongue of the divine. She urged him to grab the cross and join her in prayer. Whatever was this plague that had stricken him, only the Lord could salvage him. He took the cross into his arms and prayed along with the young woman. After a few moments of prayer, the priest cried out in pain again, exclaiming, My hands are on fire!" Elizabeth let go of the cross immediately. The priest shrieked as he felt the skin of his palms envelop the golden crucifix. He writhed like a worm trying to shake away the scorching golden object from his hands. Elizabeth stood over the clergyman and watched in horror as the priest rolled around on the ground. He locked eyes with her and growled at her. "This bitch did this to me. Burn this whore of Satan. Kill her before her evil consumes us all." Elizabeth smiled again, a smile too wide to be human. Her eyes widened with amusement as she stared, with an almost demonic stare at the restless body of the priest for a moment before proclaiming, "Those who lie in the name of the Lord shall suffocate on their own poisonous words." The priest stopped moving. His eyes widened with fear. His body began convulsing uncontrollably. prompting the fallen priest to admit some terrible sounds involuntarily. After a few moments, a sea of spiders crawled out of his mouth until there was nothing but a leathery husk remaining. Elizabeth turned to the riotous crowd and proclaimed, "As I've said, the Lord's angel instructed me to find the one who had formed a pact with the devil through the waters that have touched my body. Father Herman stepped on the puddle which I left when I set foot on the ground. I found the one who had poisoned our community for so long. I found those who need to be put to death for the crimes of devil-worshipping and witchcraft." With her diabolical smile stretched from ear to ear, she pointed at the remaining clergymen and exclaimed, "Tear them apart as the inhabitants of a Tartarus world." The townsfolk obediently complied. Thus, at the end of the witch trial, the cries of men being torn to pieces by a maddened mob on the bank of the river Leitha, while Elizabeth Dietricher watched on. Her wicked smile never faded from her otherwise delicate face.